Little Gretchen in the Wooden Shoe by Elizabeth Harrison. Once upon a time, a long time ago, far away across the great ocean in a country called Germany, there could be seen a small log hut on the edge of a great forest whose fir trees extended for miles and miles to the north. This little house, made of heavy hewn logs, had but one room in it. A rough pine door gave entrance to this room, and a small square window admitted the light. At the back of the house was built an old-fashioned stone chimney, out of which in winter usually curled a thin blue smoke, showing that there was not very much fire within. Small as the house was, it was large enough for the two people who lived in it. I want to tell you a story today about these two people. One was an old grey-haired woman, so old that the little children of the village, nearly half a mile away, often wondered whether she had come into the world with the huge mountains and the great fir trees, which stood out like giants back of her small hut. Her face was wrinkled all over with deep lines, which if the children could only have read or write, would have told them of many years of cheerful, happy self-sacrifice, of loving, anxious, watching beside sick beds, of quiet endurance of pain, of many a day of hunger and cold, and of 1,000 deeds of unselfish love for other people. But of course, they could not read this strange handwriting. They only knew that she was old and wrinkled, and that she stooped as she walked. None of them seemed to fear her, for her smile was always cheerful, and she had a kindly word for each of them if they chanced to meet her on her way to and from the village. With this old woman lived a very little girl. So bright and happy was she that the travellers who passed by the lonesome little house on the edge of the forest often thought of a sunbeam as they saw her. These two people were known in the village as Granny Goodyear and Little Gretchen. The winter had come and the frost had snapped off many of the smaller branches from the pine trees in the forest. Gretchen and her granny were up by daybreak each morning. After their simple breakfast of oatmeal, Gretchen would run to the little closet and fetch Granny's old woolen shawl, which seemed almost as old as Granny herself. Gretchen always claimed the right to put the shawl over her Granny's head, even though she had to climb onto the wooden bench to do it. After carefully pinning it under Granny's chin, she gave her a goodbye kiss, and Granny started out for her morning's work in the forest. This work was nothing more nor less than the gathering up of the twigs and branches which the autumn winds and winter frosts had thrown upon the ground. These were carefully gathered into a large bundle, which Granny tied together with a strong linen band. She then managed to lift the bundle to her shoulder and trudged off to the village with it. Here she sold the small twigs for kindling wood to the people of the village. Sometimes she would only get a few pence each day, and sometimes a dozen or more. But on this money little Gretchen and she managed to live. They had their home, and the forest kindly furnished the wood for the fire which kept them warm in the cold weather. In the summertime, Granny had a little garden at the back of the hut, where she raised, with little Gretchen's help, a few potatoes and turnips and onions. These she carefully stored away for winter use. To this meagre supply, the pennies gained by selling the twigs from the forest added the oatmeal for Gretchen and a little black coffee for Granny. Meat was a thing they never thought of having. It cost too much money. Still, Granny and Gretchen were very happy because they loved each other dearly. Sometimes Gretchen would be left alone all day long in the hut, because Granny would have some work to do in the village after selling her bundle of sticks and twigs. It was during these long days that little Gretchen had taught herself to sing the song which the wind sang to the pine branches. In the summertime, she learned the chirp and twitter of the birds, until her voice might almost be mistaken for a bird's voice. She learned to dance as the swaying shadows did, and even to talk to the stars which shone through the little square window when Granny came home too late or too tired to talk. Sometimes, when the weather was fine, or her Granny had an extra bundle of newly knitted stockings to take to the village, she would let little Gretchen go along with her. It chanced that one of these trips to the town came just the week before Christmas, and Gretchen's eyes were delighted by the sight of the lovely Christmas trees which stood in the window of the village store. It seemed to her that she would never tire of looking at the knit dolls, the woolly lambs, the little wooden shops with their queer painted men and women in them, and all the other fine things. She had never owned a plaything in her whole life. Therefore, toys, which you and I would not think much of, seemed to her to be very beautiful. That night after their supper of baked potatoes was over, and little Gretchen had cleared away the dishes and swept up the hearth because Granny dear was so tired, she brought her own small wooden stool and placed it very near Granny's feet and sat down upon it, folding her hands on her lap. Granny knew that this meant she wanted to talk about something, so she smilingly laid away the large Bible which she had been reading and took up her knitting, which was as much as to say, "Well, Gretchen, dear Granny is ready to listen." "Granny," said Gretchen slowly, "it's almost Christmas, isn't it?" "Yes, dearie," said Granny, "only 5 more days now." And then she sighed. But little Gretchen was so happy that she did not notice Granny's sigh. "What do you think, Granny, I'll get this Christmas?" said she, looking up eagerly into Granny's face. "Ah, child, child," said Granny, shaking her head. "You'll have no Christmas this year. We are too poor for that." "Oh, but Granny," interrupted little Gretchen, "think of all the beautiful toys we saw in the village today. Surely Santa Claus has sent enough for every little child." "Ah, dearie," said Granny, "those toys are for people who can pay money for them, and we have no money to spend for Christmas toys." "Well, Granny," said Gretchen, "perhaps some of the little children who live in the great house on the hill at the other end of the village will be willing to share some of their toys with me. They will be so glad to give them to a little girl who has none." Dear child," said Granny, leaning forward and stroking the soft, shiny hair of the little girl. "Your heart is so full of love. You would be glad to bring a Christmas to every child, but their heads are so full of what they are going to get that they forget all about anybody else but themselves." Then she sighed and shook her head. "Well, Granny," said Gretchen, her bright, happy tone of voice growing a little less joyous, "perhaps the dear Santa Claus will show some of the village children how to make presents that do not cost money, and some of them may surprise me Christmas morning with a present. And Granny dear," added she, springing up from the low stool, "can't I gather some of the pine branches and take them to the old sick man who lives in the house by the mill, so that he can have the sweet smell of our pine forest in his room all Christmas Day?" "Yes, dearie," said Granny. "You may do what you can to make the Christmas bright and happy, but you must not expect any present yourself." "Oh, but Granny," said little Gretchen, her face brightening. "You forget all about the shining Christmas angels who came down to earth and sang their wonderful song the night the beautiful Christ child was born. They are so loving and good that they will not forget any little child. I shall ask my dear stars tonight to tell them of us. You know," she added with a look of relief, "the stars are so very high that they must know the angels quite well as they come and go with their messages from the loving God." Granny sighed as she half whispered, poor child," but Gretchen threw her arm around Granny's neck and gave her a hearty kiss, saying as she did so, "Oh, Granny, you don't talk to the stars often enough, else you wouldn't be sad at Christmas time." Then she danced all around the room, whirling her little skirts about her to show Granny how the wind had made the snow dance that day. She looked so droll and funny that Granny forgot her cares and worries and laughed with little Gretchen over her new snow dance. The days passed on, and the morning before Christmas Eve came. Gretchen, having tidied up the little room, for Granny had taught her to be a careful little housewife, was off to the forest, singing a bird-like song, almost as happy and free as the birds themselves. She was very busy that day, preparing a surprise for Granny. First, however, she gathered the most beautiful of the fir branches within her reach to take the next morning to the old sick man who lived by the mill. The day was all too short for the happy little girl. When Granny came trudging wearily home that night, she found the frame of the doorway covered with green pine branches. "It's to welcome you, Granny, it's to welcome you," cried Gretchen. "Our dear old home wanted to give you a Christmas welcome. Don't you see? The branches of evergreen make it look as if it were smiling all over, and it is trying to say a happy Christmas to you, Granny." Granny laughed and kissed the little girl as they opened the door and went in together. Here was a new surprise for Granny. The 4 posts of the wooden bed, which stood in one corner of the room, had been trimmed by the busy little fingers with smaller and more flexible branches of the pine trees. A small bouquet of red mountain ash berries stood at each side of the fireplace, and these together with the trimmed posts of the bed gave the plain old room quite a festival look. Gretchen laughed and clapped her hands and danced about until the house seemed full of music to poor tired Granny, whose heart had been sad as she turned toward their home that night, thinking of the disappointment which must come to loving little Gretchen the next morning. After supper was over, little Gretchen drew her stool up to Granny's side, and laying her soft little hands on Granny's knee, asked to be told once again the story of the coming of the Christ child, how the night that he was born the beautiful angels had sung their wonderful song, and how the whole sky had become bright with a strange and glorious light, never seen by the people of earth before. Gretchen had heard the story many, many times before, but she never grew tired of it, and now that Christmas Eve had come again, the happy little child wanted to hear it once more. When Granny had finished telling it, the two sat quiet and silent for a little while, thinking it over. Then Granny rose and said that it was time for them to go to bed. She slowly took off her heavy wooden shoes, such as are worn in that country, and placed them beside the hearth. Gretchen looked thoughtfully at them for a minute or two, and then she said, "Don't you think that somebody in all this wide world will think of us tonight?" "Nay, Gretchen," said Granny, I don't think anyone will." "Well then, Granny," said Gretchen, "the Christmas angels will, I know. So I am going to take one of your wooden shoes and put it on the windowsill outside so that they may see it as they pass by. I am sure the stars will tell the Christmas angels where the shoe is." "Ah, you foolish, foolish child," said Granny. "You are only getting ready for a disappointment. Tomorrow morning there will be nothing whatever in the shoe. I can tell you that now." But little Gretchen would not listen. She only shook her head and cried out, "Ah, Granny, you don't talk enough to the stars." With this, she seized the shoe and, opening the door, hurried out to place it on the windowsill. It was very dark, and something soft and cold seemed to gently kiss her hair and face. Gretchen knew by this that it was snowing, and she looked up to the sky, anxious to see if the stars were in sight. But a strong wind was tumbling in the dark. Heavy snow clouds about had shut away all else. "Never mind," said Gretchen softly to herself. "The stars are up there, even if I can't see them, and the Christmas angels do not mind snowstorms." Just then a rough wind sweeping by the little girl, whispering something to her which she could not understand, and then it made a sudden rush up to the snow clouds and parted them, so that the deep, mysterious sky appeared beyond, and shining down out of the mist of it was Gretchen's favourite star. "Ah, little star," said the child, laughing aloud. "I knew you were there, though I couldn't see you. Will you whisper to the Christmas angels as they come by that little Gretchen wants so very much to have a Christmas gift tomorrow morning, if they have one to spare, and she has put one of Granny's shoes upon the windowsill ready for it." A moment more and the little girl, standing on tiptoe, had reached the windowsill and placed the shoe upon it, and was back again in the house beside Granny in the warm fire. The two went quietly to bed, and that night as little Gretchen knelt to pray to the Heavenly Father, she thanked him for having sent the Christ child into the world to teach all mankind how to be loving and unselfish. And in a few moments she was quietly sleeping, dreaming of the Christmas angels. The next morning, very early, even before the sun was up, little Gretchen was awakened by the sound of sweet music coming from the village. She listened for a moment, and then she knew that the choir boys were singing the Christmas carols in the open air of the village street. She sprang up out of bed and began to dress herself as quickly as possible, singing as she dressed. While Granny was slowly putting on her clothes, little Gretchen, having finished dressing herself, unfastened the door and hurried out to see what the Christmas angels had left in the old wooden shoe. The white snow covered everything, trees, stumps, roads and pastures, until the whole world looked like fairyland. Gretchen climbed up on a large stone which was beneath the window and carefully lifted down the wooden shoe. The snow tumbled off of it in a shower over the little girl's hands. But she did not heed that. She ran hurriedly back into the house, putting her hand into the toe of the shoe as she ran. "Oh, Granny, she exclaimed. "You didn't believe the Christmas angels would think about us. But see, they have. Here is a dear little bird nestled down in the toe of your shoe. Oh, isn't he beautiful?" Granny came forward and looked at what the child was holding lovingly in her hand. There she saw a tiny chickadee whose wing was evidently broken by the rough and boisterous winds of the night before, and who had taken shelter in the safe dry toe of the old wooden shoe. She gently took the little bird out of Gretchen's hands and skillfully bound his broken wing to his side so that he need not hurt himself by trying to fly with it. Then she showed Gretchen how to make a nice warm nest for the little stranger close beside the fire, and when their breakfast was ready, she let Gretchen feed the little bird with a few moist crumbs. Later in the day, Gretchen carried the fresh, green boughs to the old sick man by the mill, and on her way home stopped to see and enjoy the Christmas toys of some of the other children whom she knew, never once wishing they were hers. When she reached home, she found that the little bird had gone to sleep. Soon, however, he opened his eyes and stretched his head up, as if saying as plain as a bird could say, "Now, my friends, I want you to give me something more to eat." Gretchen gladly fed him again, and then holding him in her lap, she softly and gently stroked his grey feathers until the little creature seemed to lose all fear of her. That evening, Granny taught her a Christmas hymn and told her another beautiful Christmas story. Then Gretchen made up a funny little story to tell to the bird. He winked his eyes and turned his head from side to side in such a droll fashion that Gretchen laughed until the tears came. As Granny got ready for bed that night, Gretchen put her arms softly around Granny's neck and whispered, "What a beautiful Christmas we have had today, Granny. Is there anything in the world more lovely than Christmas?" "Nay, child, nay," said Granny, "not to such loving hearts as yours." A story of the Christ child. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, on the night before Christmas, a little child was wandering all alone through the streets of a great city. There were many people on the street, fathers and mothers, sisters and brothers, uncles and aunts, and even grey-haired grandfathers and grandmothers, all of whom were hurrying home with bundles of presents for each other and for their little ones. Fine carriages rolled by, express wagons rattled past, even old carts were pressed into service, and all things seemed in a hurry and glad with expectation of the coming Christmas morning. From some of the windows, bright lights were already beginning to stream until it was almost as bright as day. But the little child seemed to have no home and wandered about listlessly from street to street. No one took any notice of him, perhaps Jack Frost, who bit his bare toes and made the ends of his fingers tingle. The north wind, too, seemed to notice the child, for it blew against him and pierced his ragged garments through and through, causing him to shiver with cold. Home after home he passed, looking with longing eyes through the windows, in upon the glad, happy children, most of whom were helping to trim the Christmas trees for the coming morrow. "Surely," said the child to himself, "where there is so much gladness and happiness, some of it may be for me." So with timid steps he approached a large and handsome house. Through the windows he could see a tall and stately Christmas tree already lighted. Many presents hung upon it. Its green boughs were trimmed with gold and silver ornaments. Slowly he climbed up the broad steps and gently rapped at the door. It was opened by a large manservant. He had a kindly face, although his voice was deep and gruff. He looked at the little child for a moment, then sadly shook his head and said, "Go down off the steps. There is no room here for such as you." He looked sorry as he spoke. Possibly he remembered his own little ones at home and was glad that they were not out in this cold and bitter night. Through the open door a bright light shone, and the warm air, filled with fragrance of the Christmas pine, rushed out from the inner room and greeted the little wanderer with a kiss. As the child turned back into the cold and darkness, he wondered why the footman had spoken thus. For surely, thought he, those little children would love to have another companion join them in their joyous Christmas festival. But the little children inside did not even know that he had knocked at the door. The street grew colder and darker as the child passed on. He went sadly forward, saying to himself, "Is there no one in all this great city who will share the Christmas with me?" Further and further down the street he wandered, to where the homes were not so large and beautiful. There seemed to be little children inside of nearly all the houses. They were dancing and frolicking about. Christmas trees could be seen in nearly every window, with beautiful dolls and trumpets and picture books and balls and tops and other dainty toys hung upon them. In one window the child noticed a little lamb made of soft white wool. Around its neck was tied a red ribbon. It had evidently been hung on the tree for one of the children. The little stranger stopped before the window and looked long and earnestly at the beautiful things inside. But most of all, he was drawn toward the white lamb. At last, creeping up to the window pane, he gently tapped upon it. A little girl came to the window and looked out into the dark street where the snow had now begun to fall. She saw the child, but she only frowned and shook her head and said, "Go away and come some other time. We are too busy to take care of you now." Back into the dark, cold streets he turned again. The wind was whirling past him and seemed to say, hurry on, we have no time to stop. 'Tis Christmas Eve and everybody is in a hurry tonight." Again and again, the little child rapped softly at door or window pane. At each place he was refused admission. One mother feared he might have some ugly disease which her darlings would catch. Another father said he had only enough for his own children and none to spare for beggars. Still another told him to go home where he belonged and not to trouble other folks. The hours passed. Later grew the night, and colder grew the wind, and darker seemed the street. Further and further the little one wandered. There was scarcely anyone left upon the street by this time, and the few who remained did not seem to see the child, when suddenly ahead of him there appeared a bright single ray of light. It shone through the darkness into the child's eyes. He looked up smilingly and said, "I will go where the small light beckons. Perhaps they will share their Christmas with me." Hurrying past all the other houses, he soon reached the end of the street and went straight up to the window from which the light was streaming. It was a poor little low house, but the child cared not for that. The light seemed still to call him in. From what do you suppose the light came? Nothing but a tallow candle which had been placed in an old cup with a broken handle, in the window as a glad token of Christmas Eve. There was neither curtain nor shade to the small square window, and as the little child looked in, he saw standing upon a neat wooden table a branch of a Christmas tree. The room was plainly furnished, but it was very clean. Near the fireplace sat a lovely-faced mother with a little 2-year-old on her knee and an older child beside her. The 2 children were looking into their mother's face and listening to a story. She must have been telling them a Christmas story, I think. A few bright coals were burning in the fireplace, and all seemed light and warm within. The little wanderer crept closer and closer to the window pane. So sweet was the mother's face, so loving seemed the little children, that at last he took courage and tapped gently, very gently, on the door. The mother stopped talking. The little children looked up. "What was that, mother?" asked the little girl at her side. "I think it was someone tapping on the door," replied the mother. "Run as quickly as you can and open it, dear, for it is a bitter cold night to keep anyone waiting in this storm." "Oh, mother, I think it was the bough of the tree tapping against the window pane," said the little girl. "Do please go on with our story." Again the little wanderer tapped upon the door. my child," exclaimed the mother, rising. "That certainly was a rap on the door. Run quickly and open it. No one must be left out in the cold on our beautiful Christmas Eve." The child ran to the door and threw it wide open. The mother saw the ragged stranger standing without, cold and shivering, with bare head and almost bare feet. She held out both hands and drew him into the warm, bright room. "You poor dear child," was all she said, and putting her arms around him, she drew him close to her breast. "He is very cold, my children," she exclaimed. "We must warm him." "And," added the little girl, "we must love him and give him some of our Christmas too." "Yes," said the mother, "but first let us warm him." The mother sat down by the fire with the little child on her lap, and her own little ones warmed his half-frozen hands in theirs. The mother smoothed his tangled curls, and bending low over his head, kissed the child's face. She gathered the 3 little ones in her arms, and the candle and the firelight shone over them. For a moment the room was very still. By and by the little girl said softly to her mother, "May we not light the Christmas tree and let him see how beautiful it looks?" "Yes," said the mother. With that she seated the child on a low stool beside the fire, and went herself to fetch the few simple ornaments which from year to year she had saved for her children's Christmas tree. They were soon so busy that they did not notice the room had filled with a strange and brilliant light. They turned and looked at the spot where the little wanderer sat. His ragged clothes had changed to garments, white and beautiful. His tangled curls seemed like a halo of golden light about his head, but most glorious of all was his face, which shone with a light so dazzling that they could scarcely look upon it. In silent wonder they gazed at the child. Their little room seemed to grow larger and larger until it was as wide as the whole world. The roof of their low house seemed to expand and rise until it reached to the sky. With a sweet and gentle smile, the wonderful child looked upon them for a moment and then slowly rose and floated through the air above the treetops, beyond the church spire, higher even than the clouds themselves, until he appeared to them to be a shining star in the sky above. At last he disappeared from sight. The astonished children turned in hushed awe to their mother and said in a whisper, "Oh, mother, it was the Christ child, was it not?" And the mother answered in a low tone, "Yes." And it is said, dear children, that each Christmas Eve, the little Christ child wanders through some town or village, and those who receive him and take him into their homes and hearts have given to them this marvellous vision which is denied to others.